Quick show of hands. If your employee gets drunk in Cancun on vacation, gets arrested, and then posts it on Instagram, is that your problem as HR? I guess we got to find out. Dum, dum, dum. Your coworker posts tequila shots every weekend. Another employee tells you that they're looking for another job. Someone else just gets arrested over the weekend. As HR, what exactly is your business and what isn't? Welcome back to People Person, the show where HR people talk about, well, people stuff. I'm Kate Noel, SVP and Head of People Operations here at Morning Brew Inc. And today we're talking about the color gray, meaning that area where someone's personal life ends and where HR's responsibility probably begins. Joining me is Sarah O'Melia, who's the Vice President of Learning and Employee Communications at Cisiv and host of the Don't Get Played podcast. Together, we're diving into privacy, professionalism, trust, alcohol, social media, addiction, background checks. And if those weren't enough to get you excited about today's conversation, then how about this question, which is, just because HR knows something, does that mean HR should do something? Well, we're about to find out. On top of managing teams and creating a healthy company culture, HR is also meant to be a strategic partner. But when you're weighed down with manual tracking, incomplete state forms, late e-verify submissions, and playing catch up with ever-changing regulations, well, it's hard to think past the next item on your to-do list. Now that's where Equifax comes in. Equifax helps monitor regulations and activities to help HR teams mitigate risk, protect employees and organizations, and turn compliance into a strategic advantage. From onboarding to offboarding, Equifax provides HR teams with people-focused, compliance-driven solutions. It helps employers gain visibility into tax data, maximizes potential tax credits, minimizes administrative errors, and reduces compliance exposure. Help your team get back to what it does best. Learn more at Equifax.com/HR Brew. That's Equifax.com/HR Brew. Hey, Sarah girl, what's going on? Let's get into it.
Oh, I am so good. So excited to be here with my fellow Hufflepuff.
Live, live, live. And I'm extremely childish in a very serious job. So with that being said, even before we get started into the hard-hitting questions, I wanted to play a little game with you, which is HR business or mind your business. Are you down for it?
Yes, let's go.
Okay. Quick rules. Basically, I'm going to run a few scenarios by you. You're going to let me know if it's HR's business, meaning we should probably do an investigative charge on that, or do
hmm
we just mind our business and just remember this ain't got anything to do with us? Carry on. Sounds
You
good?
got it.
Okay, cool. First scenario. An employee posts a video partying in Vegas every weekend on social media and it has come across your attention. Is that HR business or shall we mind our business?
Shades of gray, but rule of thumb, mind our business.
Okay, scenario number 2. A manager learns an employee has started dating a coworker from another department, but it did not formally come before you as an HR person. Is that HR business or shall we mind our business?
HR business.
Aha, I'm going to unpack that a little bit. I like that. Okay. Scenario number 3. Funny enough, I have experience. You know what? Stick to the scenario. Okay. An employee gets a DUI over the weekend. Is it thy business or do we mind our business?
That has to be HR business.
Okay. Scenario number 4. We're rounding it out really soon. An employee tells HR that they are sober and company happy hours make them very uncomfortable. Is that actually HR business to do something or do we just mind it and just let it play out?
Oh, HR business, 100%.
Love that. Agreed and aligned. All right, last one. And I feel like we're really bonding over this. So I'm glad we did this
Yes.
icebreaker to see if we're compatible. A top performer has a viral TikTok account where they regularly criticize corporate culture. They work for your company. Is it HR business or do we mind our business?
There are
Hmm.
asterisks there, right? But rule of thumb, if they're not a representative of the company and they're not naming the company by name, we have to mind our business.
Interesting take. Okay. And I think it's fair to say the asterisks, because there definitely are a lot of nuances in that as
Yes.
well. So, given all that, round of applause for my girl because I actually agreed with all of your answers. But again, kindred spirits, no surprise there
Yes,
at all. So, that also confirms I brought the right person in here for this conversation with talking about basically the world of privacy, employees and us as HR people, what we should be doing, should not be doing, but most importantly, how do we navigate the evolving space of what that looks like? Because I'm even assured, what, 7 years ago, six, five even, were we even talking about employees being on TikTok and what that means? I
right.
don't really know for real, but here we are, right? So, with that being said, here's the first question I'd love to get your mind on, which is one of the biggest tensions in HR is actually balancing an employee's right to privacy with an employer's responsibility to assess the risk. Do you think in your line of work that there is a framework you use when deciding whether something is simply personal information versus a legitimate business risk? And I feel like the game kind of gave a little bit of like an understanding, but I kind of want to know
Mhm.
what's that thing that runs through your mind when you're deciding yay or nay?
Yeah, 100%. And I think in order for an HR team or an HR individual to make these unbiased choices, these consistent practices, you have to have something in place, right? Even if it's not a written policy, something inside your own like team dynamic or your own personal decision making that helps guide you and sort of check yourself.
Mhm.
So for me, I sort of use this three-prong approach where it is saying, is it a performance issue? Is it hurting the culture? Or is it a blatant policy violation? If the answer to any of those is yes, then it's HR's obligation to step in.
Three. Give it to me one more time.
Yeah.
Company problem or culture?
So
One more time.
performance issue,
Uh
you're
huh.
hurting the company culture, or it's a policy violation.
The big three. I like that. I
Mhm.
respect it too. We need to write that down somewhere so it's on our desk at all times. Because you're right. And I guess it'll be a doozy if it's like a 2 for 3 or a 3 out of 3. Then it's just like call an all
Right.
hands emergent like emergency meeting. But I think it's worth the fact that like looking into it to see if it goes beyond a conversation is worth it. But if it hits the three, then we should pay attention at the very least.
Absolutely. And, it's
Okay.
one of those things where I feel like everyone is like, oh, HR and PIPs and, performance and terminations. And just because it's on our radar, it doesn't equal a termination, right? It could
hmm
equal a coaching conversation, it could equal a lesson learned. So just because it's on HR's radar doesn't automatically mean something bad is about to happen.
Fair point. And I think us in the community, we understand that, but that gets lost in translation once it starts hitting manager level. And if managers don't know that, then certainly they're not letting their team members or their directs know. So I think as a tidbit from this conversation, a reminder like, hey, when you're having one-on-ones with managers in general too, explain the definition of radar. Because while we may understand it and we're just like, oh no, it's just a quick Slack. It's actually not a real formal thing. But
Right.
giving that refresher to managers could actually be a long-term strategy that you didn't think could take longer than 5 seconds.
Definitely.
Live. Okay, so you said check. So speaking of that, background checks. This actually is something that's personal to me because I've experienced this in my own life, and I'm happy to give you what my take was, but I'm interested to know your thoughts. It was actually something where a person that I knew in my life, they were going through an interview process. They got the job. They were thrilled. They ran through the hurdles, jumped through the fire rings, and they got the offer, right? But now the thing that happened is that they went through the background check, nothing came up. However, through a quick Google search, the recruiter and the hiring manager found something that had to do something with legalities. That was then
Mm.
brought up, and then the conversation was had about, hey, we found this. Where can we go from here? And then that conversation led to its own space. Now, I'm curious to know in situations like that, when something didn't technically come through a formal process that is established within a business, and instead it came as like an aside, how do what is the correct way or what is the best practice and how to approach it, given that it technically wasn't a part of a formal routine?
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that you mentioned this sort of being like the color gray. We're human resources. So no matter what policies we have, we're working with humans, right? And so there's
Mhm.
automatically going to be sort of this fuzzy space. Um, but what I will say with that is it really does depend on the company and it depends on the role. So, for example, let's say that all of a sudden they came across somebody's digital footprint, right? Their social media account, they're an influencer, a content creator, they have a blog. what we really need to ask ourselves is this going completely against what our company stands for from a values and culture perspective? So I have to say, right, when we're working with humans, there is going to be this area of gray, this fuzzy space, because we might have all the policies in the world, but with humans, there's going to be sort of that asterisk, that fuzzy area. So when it comes to something showing up sort of unconventionally, right, a
Yeah.
digital footprint, a blog article, anything like that, what the company has to consider is the role that you're hiring for, right? Is this whatever's showing up relevant to the role? So let's say that somebody is going for a marketing position and they are a content creator whose content goes against something that you stand for as a company with your culture or your values. That's something to consider. If it's somebody who is in finance or they're, a nurse or whatever that role might be, where it doesn't overlap at all, there needs to be some discernment there of what are we basing our decision off of and how is this going to influence the way that they show up for work? And if the answer is it doesn't, then we
Mm.
have to mind our business.
Mm. I wonder if it's worth then, because it sounds like, and I agree with you, that if it's something that's unconventional that's discovered, whether it's through a quick search or et cetera, versus a background check, we do still approach the results of that essentially the same way. We do take it pretty seriously, whether it's for, the business and it's aligned with our values or it goes against it. We still take it into consideration of if we bring the person on or not. So I wonder, is it worth then in the talent acquisition space or management to say, background checks, if whether it's a third party person who's running it, but also make mention that there may be, social media checks or just digital footprint checks. Is that worth mentioning, or should we kind of leave it as is and whatever happens kind of happens?
I mean, you always can. I think
Okay.
that if you have if you are a company who goes through social media as part of the normal background check, you might want to let that person know. But also, I did have someone on the Don't Get Played podcast that talked about social media and background checks. And the real caveat here is that the only thing that anyone can see is the public information. So something that someone is willingly putting out there into the world. So we definitely want to be mindful of privacy, but we also have to recognize what information we're putting out there to then be sort of
Mm.
teased through by the general public.
That is such a fair point because I think my mind just naturally assumes if it's not corporate, then it's considered private because it's like
Mm,
correlated with someone's personal life. But that's not one and the same. That you have to understand, like the moment you put it on, Bill Gates' internet, it's gonna stay there. So you have to
right.
understand, like that's the risk you essentially take. That kind of unlocked something in my brain. I just assumed, like the moment it's outside of the workplace, it's considered private. But if it's there, it's for public consumption, whether I'm
Yeah,
on the clock or not, as an HR person. Wow.
absolutely. And
Okay.
there's another piece of that, if you don't mind me going on a little tangent here.
I love a tangent. I love a scenic route. Take me, Sarah. Yes.
But when we talk about HR issues, like there have been instances where, to your point, people say, "Well, I did this thing, but it was off the clock." And we talked about sort of those 3 points of where HR has to step in. But there's another facet there, which we're going to call the Monday morning test, where if it follows you through the door on Monday morning, it can then become an HR issue. So I'll give you an example where
Please.
not at my current company, but long, long ago, there was an instance where we had an individual who was writing things to a colleague on social media that were not kind, right? And they basically, the argument was it was on my personal equipment, it was on my social media account, it was on my time. So it shouldn't have any bearing. But if what they're doing, if the damage they're doing is following them in the door Monday morning, then it is something that we have to look into and take very seriously.
Oh, that's a fair point. It follows you. I guess that kind of goes to like the typical case study we have where people say, what is the work location? Like if there's a happy hour at a bar, or if there's like a gathering of employees off the clock, but it's not in the office, is it still
Mhm.
considered a workplace issue? Exactly with the equation that you gave. Well, look, if it follows you back into the workplace or to the space that you call work, then
Right.
yeah, it still counts.
Yeah.
Ah,
And if you
so
want
good.
to drink as much as you want on Sunday night, that's fine.
Mhm.
But if it follows you on Monday and how you show up on Monday, that's where the issue starts.
Yeah, and honestly, at our big age, I'm gonna need you to have a hangover routine. Like if it comes down to it, If you're gonna do the things, be responsible people, por favor. I'm not mad at that
Right.
at all. Not mad at that at all. Okay, so with that being said, I think it's kind of interesting then to kind of think about social media policies in general. I think there's a ton of HR folks who may be listening, taking all this information in, and they're walking away saying, okay, well, exactly like Sarah and Kate said at the top of this conversation, we should probably have something that's internal. Maybe it's not formalized, but it's something that we kind of understand is the framework of how we approach situations. What advice would you give to HR leaders of like the thing they should be mindful of when teaching this to other HR team members of how the best way to have the type of mindset for approaching these things?
That is a hard one because everyone is going to have different things that send up the red flags, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is why having that policy in place. Now we can have sort of an expectation, right? Sort of that not unspoken because we're talking about it, but unwritten expectation
Mm-hmm.
of here's where we're going to do things, right? Here's where we're going to act and here's where it isn't any of our business. Here's where there's a
Mm-hmm.
policy violation, here's where there's not. And so I think that's good to communicate. But I also think part of it is sort of living and learning, right? So if I'm an HR professional, I bring something to my boss and my boss says, let's sit on this, let's observe, let's identify a pattern, right? That is then me making sort of a tally mark of, okay, this is not enough to warrant a full HR investigation. It piqued our notice, right? And so I get
Mm-hmm.
those sort of context clues of where we step in. Now, if you want to have sort of that outline of that three-prong approach of where HR steps in and you want that written down as documentation, 100%. But you also need to understand that there has to be a level of discernment when something falls in between those lines.
Okay. And something that's just jumped out to me as an example that falls between those lines is something that I'm sure has happened many times over. LinkedIn obviously has that feature now where an employee or a person can have like open to work or we're hiring or et cetera.
Yes.
And see, you're smiling because you know exactly probably where I'm going to go with this. I know this is resonating immediately. And a manager comes to you as an HR person, there's like, I found out that X person has open to work on their LinkedIn account. And it's not to say this person had any performance concerns. This employee may not even been, you know, someone that was having any issues. We thought they may have been fine. And then immediately
Hmm.
after finding out, we're realizing they may be a flight risk. So getting this information, what does one do? What's the correct way to approach it? What's the ethical way in approaching it? Because on one hand, you're like, well, technically speaking, they didn't tell us anything. And so is it right for me to do things that might then impact them moving
Mm.
discreetly and essentially not doing anything wrong? Or on the other hand, is it irresponsible of me as an HR person knowing now that there is a possible flight risk and not doing my work to mitigate risk?
That's very fair. And you highlighted two very, very key points. I mean, I think the first thing is if a manager comes to you sort of coaching the manager through, have you spoken with them? Have they
Mm,
identified any issues that they're running into? Have they identified that they are unhappy with something, right? It could be, hey, I'm looking for the next promotion and it's not here right now. So I'm going to go
mhm,
look for it elsewhere. And if that's the case, there's only so much we can do from on the company side. I will say that it definitely warrants a conversation, not necessarily
okay.
with HR, although HR could be there to coach and support. I feel like it would be more between the manager and the employee saying, I saw this. I don't know, this could have been here from, when you were interviewing with us, and I just
Mm.
noticed it now. But if it is new, can you tell me more about this? You're not in trouble. I'm just trying to figure out what's prompting you to look elsewhere. And if it's something that we can solve for, that we can work through, then let's do that. If it's not, then maybe we can figure out a way that I can be a reference. We can create some sort of transition plan. And it's not always pushing somebody out, but just offering them support of if this is the way that it's going to go, then let's work on building a structure together that makes sense and it benefits us both.
Oh, I love that. And you know what? I can't help but have my wheels turn a little bit. I wonder if it's taking it too far by doing this. And let me know what your vibe is on that, where
Mm.
you almost then want to have a paper trail, if you will, from the manager doing a recap of that conversation just to
Hmm.
show that there hopefully will be no like subconscious thought of like retaliation now that the manager is aware that this employee has now put open to work, whether they explained that it existed before they joined or maybe it is present and they just were just seeing what was out there. Do you think it's worth as an HR to advise the manager, like, hey, send a recap email to show that you are here to support, you want to help with the transition, or at least speak to the things that were possibly making them unhappy that had them looking outside, just as like maybe like a covering, if you will, or insurance to make sure there's something that doesn't point to us now knowing and just saying, hey, I was then pushed out because
Right.
I did what I should do as an employee if I felt a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a paper trail can never hurt, and it doesn't
Okay.
always have to read like a paper trail, you know?
Not at
Obviously,
all. Yeah.
people are going to know that we need to keep track of this, but it's also a thank you for bringing this to my attention. On my side as a manager, for my
Hmm.
accountability, here are the things that I'm going to work on, or here's how I'm
Yes.
going to support you, so that it is super crystal clear to the receiving employee.
I love that. And yeah, I agree 1,000,000%. If anything, I'd want it to be almost as informal of a paper trail as possible because then it looks like a fraud. Like, then it looks like, okay, what is
Right.
happening here? That you're sending a Google Doc that, like, there's no need for that. A Slack is real cute if that's what you use, or Teams, whatever it is. That still serves in a digital capacity as like a trail. But yes, accountability. And I like that. If you start off the conversation with saying, this is more for me as a manager than it is for you, I think that also puts the employee at ease of knowing, like, there's a place of trust. I can trust the situation and feel heard at the same time.
Right. 100%.
Okay, well, speaking of trust, your podcast talks about that, where you basically say, who can you trust? So, in an era where AI can generate resumes, interview answers, references, social media content, and child, even fake identities, do you think it's been harder now to establish trust in the workplace, or does it just simply need a different approach? Because at this point, do you know what you're actually getting, and how can we still show up as our full authentic self in the space?
Yeah, I mean, trust is hard. And you're right. It's even harder in this space of AI because you're right. The resumes are polished. There have been articles about people using almost like avatars in video interviews. And so, yeah. And so there's this craziness around I'm seeing something and I'm not even sure if it's real.
Mm,
Um, and so, from an HR and just a general organizational perspective, if you are interviewing someone, if you're trying to establish, can I trust this person? Is this the right talent to bring in? Then it needs to be multifaceted, right? I'm not going to judge someone solely on a resume. If something feels a little off in the video interview, I might,
mm,
say, hey, would you be able to jump on a call real quick? Right. So, finding different ways to ensure that these people are who they say they are. And I'm not gonna lie, this has been going on forever, right? Scammers have been around forever,
Scammers
but
be
in the
scamming, Sarah. Scammers be scamming.
that
Booming
is the
industry,
truth.
booming.
Yes, but with AI, it has made it so much easier. And
Mm.
so just making sure that you're so aware, right? Your bells and whistles are ready to ring at any moment, and not in a way that is paranoid, but in a way that is very aware of the reality that we're living in.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring that up is because in this theme that we're talking about today, like, the word trust is the common thread. Like, if you were to find something about someone that's considered private or personal, when it comes to your attention, you're addressing it as an HR person. I would hope, and I think the company hopes too, that that trust has been established already. So even if it's been brought to your attention, the employee, the manager knows that the baseline is this person who's in this HR seat is working for our best interest, and hopefully our best interest is aligned with what the company's best interest is, depending on what the
Right.
conversation is. And so, speaking of something that's always been happening aside from scammers, is the narrative that HR can't be trusted. Like, I'm sure we hear
Mhm.
that all the time. HR is the ops, HR is the police, HR is big brother. It's the eye that's seeing everything. You can't trust what they say. And I find myself, luckily, not at the place that I'm at now. Shout out to Morning Brew Inc. Holla. But outside of this place that I've been here for 7 years, it's something that I hear constantly, whether it's like going on social media, looking at Glassdoor, looking at LinkedIn, where they're saying HR can't be trusted. And it's almost like an uphill battle. And then in situations like this, it makes it difficult for there to be trust when it really is like relationship equity that helps you resolve the issue, right? So all
Mhm.
that to say, painting that picture, what are ways that HR, outside of AI existing, outside of establishing that trust of like having the conversation, what's the day-to-day things I can do as an HR professional that you think will give 10 times over of an investment that when the situation comes up, it shows up like, okay, I've established this place of trust with my employees and colleagues.
There's no silver bullet, and I love that you
Hmm.
called out that it's day to day. It is
Yeah.
the interactions that you have, and there are going to be instances, and I think this is where that narrative comes from, where HR is only there for the organization. But there are going to be moments where the organization needs to do something, right? So let's pretend it's something that's super unpleasant, like layoffs.
Okay.
And it is simply because they are not making their numbers, right? Layoffs have to happen in order for there to be no bankruptcy. Um,
Hmm.
it's not a great conversation, but HR being in that room can then say, okay, how are we going to message this to the employees? How are we going to support the employees who remain? How are we going to support the employees who are impacted? And so I guess in my mindset, it's of course the day to day, right? Building those relationships, showing up when you need to, supporting folks. But I think those some of the key moments that are going to stick in people's minds and their hearts is when something bad is happening and HR is able to carry it in a way that shows care and empathy and support.
A million times over agree. I know in my own personal life, I've seen situations where because I focus on being less corporate and being more human, and just how I speak, how I show up, how I dress, how whatever, people tend to resonate with that a bit more. And so in the places that I do need to be a bit more formal because the situation calls for it, they still trust that the person that showed up 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, and I was just like, "Hey, girl, did you watch Real Housewives? And how was that for you?" And they knew that I had a good kiki about it. Is the same person that, unfortunately, in instance like a layoff, yes, I am delivering the news to you that this is being lost, but there's still a way in which the conversation can be held with empathy or
Right.
knowing that like I am still working in your best interest. I wish there was a way, honestly, low key, that like there's like you could shout it from the mountaintops of like, hey, like although HR is the messenger of bad news at times, but it could be worse many times over too, where it's like we're giving you this information. However, there's so many times before maybe that the HR person was telling the manager, you can't fire this person. You need to put them
Right.
through a PIP. Like actually do things correctly. Like, is there any way you think in today's age something like that can exist? Or we still gotta just keep fighting the good fight and being the unsung heroes sometimes when it comes to this?
I mean, I think we're going to be fighting the good fight for a
All
while.
right.
I think that the narrative of the masses versus the
Mhm.
narrative of an HR department, there's going to be a pure numbers game here, but when you can, right, make those impacts, when you can sort of sow those seeds so that people are aware. So for example, my husband, he is not in HR, but when he goes to work, he sits there and says, "Oh my gosh, I used to complain about HR and now I hear all the things that you do and now I recognize
Mm.
all like the effort they put into it and I didn't
Mhm.
recognize that before." And so you don't have to be married to an HR professional to appreciate HR.
I would think so. Although that's a very good lifetime guarantee, if I do say so myself. If I do say so myself. But honestly, you're so right, and I definitely appreciate that. And as we think about like as we continue to approach how to help people in their personal life, how it shows up in the workplace, still being our authentic selves, I think the one thing I hope everyone listening or watching today can walk away with is like trust is the main thing. The way that you can get people to trust is if you're continuing to educate yourself and just realizing, what should be us jumping in, what should be the things we stay out of. Remembering Sarah's three things. What were they again, Sarah? What was the three prongs, my friend?
Performance issue, hurt of culture, and a policy violation.
Guys, if you don't want to get that tatted somewhere on your body and get that reimbursed, I don't know what you're doing, because that is definitely the three commandments I definitely want to live by. I didn't have that information before, but I definitely am going to keep that with me now. Because let me tell you a little secret, y'all. You're going to find some things on the internet, in social, and in privacy life. And I'm hoping that this conversation could be the thing that could be your baseline of, am I doing this right? Or can I do it better? In any case, Sarah, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your brain. Thank you for your Hogwarts education when it comes to human resources and all those things. And to everyone else who is listening and watching, like I said, if any of this resonates with you or you want to just give us a shout, please reach out. We love hearing tea, hearing what you're saying and also watching it as well. Reach out to us at peopleperson@morningbrew.com. And until next time, just remember, people are complicated. HR is also complicated. And that's also okay as long as you understand how to navigate with grace. Until next time, holla at your girl.